Welcome to China Tech Talk, the weekly discussion of technology and startups here in China. I am John Artman, editor-in-chief of Techno.com, joined as always by Matthew Brennan, founder of China Channel. So this is part two of our 1 year anniversary, looking back at some of our favorite episodes. And so, we're like I said at the end of the last episode, we're splitting it up because we like too much of it, and it's not so much of us tooting our horn, but I think looking back at the episodes that really kind of stick in our memory, and ones that we want to highlight to all of our new listeners, in case they haven't had a chance to listen to some of these. And I just want to highlight that actually, so we are just a little bit over 1 year, even though this is our 50th episode. We have missed a few weeks, unfortunately. But the first episode was published on April 20th, 2017. And now we are at, this is being recorded at least on June 1st. So we're a little bit over 1 year. And, we wouldn't be doing it without listener support. So thank you so much for listening. And also, of course, thank you so much for giving us feedback as well. So Matt, where are we starting?
What have we got next? There's so many episodes that this was tough, but I think the next one we're going to talk about is episode 24. Episode 24 was a bit special, a bit different, because it was a reference episode. So we tried to do something a little bit different in covering general background information about the Chinese landscape for technology companies. And I hope we did a good job. I mean, we certainly covered a lot. And I think anyone who's diving into this area or is early in sort of discovering this area, then that's going to be a really useful episode. And that was kind of the whole point of doing that episode, was to, we recognize that sometimes we do go quite deep, and there is a lot of assumed knowledge. And for some people, they might not have that knowledge. But they still are really interested in the topic and want to understand it quickly and easily. So that's the episode for those guys.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that also for me, it was a chance to kind of get some things off my mind, and kind of say what needed to be said about certain of these things. Because I think Matt, you're right that we did assume certain amounts of knowledge, and there were some things that were implied rather than explained. And I think that, and so just in general, that is one of my favorite episodes, just because we were able to really kind of take a look at the broader context of again, I mean, the name of the episode, I think, really kind of says it. I mean, the water that we're swimming in here in China, it's that story, or that proverb about if you ask a fish about its life, it's not going to say anything about the water that it swims in. And so that's the episode that we wanted to do, is we wanted to talk about, the things that you encounter on a regular basis while you're here, but maybe you don't quite understand why or what exactly it is, or maybe, you haven't taken the time to really examine it. And so that was us doing that. I mean, you look at, the 20th century for China was amazingly chaotic. There was a lot of misery, a lot of tragedy, and a lot of good things happening as well, and especially in the last 30 years or so. But China in the last century has been has been the story of upheaval, and I think just with the reform and opening, things have kind of settled down quite a bit. Under a very strong leader like Xi Jinping, it definitely feels like things are smoothing out a little bit. But I think whenever you're talking about what's happening now in China and the affinity for change and for technological progress, I think you have to remember that in many ways, people are still haunted by many of the things that happened in China's modern history. And of course, if we want to get into the political aspect, of course, you can call it the century of humiliation. But there's a lot more to it. I mean, under Mao Zedong, there was a lot of upheaval. There was a lot of unpredictable change in the fabric of society, where religions were cast out, Confucianism was cast out, active, like this type of thinking was actively purged from the Chinese culture as the Communist Party began to install its own ideology in the country, and in some ways now we're kind of seeing a resurgence of religion and Confucianism. Funny enough, but I think that also kind of speaks to why Chinese people are so willing to adopt and try out new technology. In some ways, again, they're looking for a better life. They as the economy is growing, life in general is getting much easier, and people are continually looking for new ways in order to take advantage of that. And then also when you look at the absence of belief, in a sense, people now seem to be more believing in technology in a way, if that makes sense, where technology in some ways is kind of filling the gaps that traditional belief systems have fit in for many cultures and peoples around the world, whereas in China there is this belief that technology itself does make your life better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's no exaggeration to say that technology is the new religion in China. To get rich is glorious is the phrase that Deng Xiaoping used before, and I think that characterized a lot of the 80s and 90s in China, where the pursuit of money and material wealth was almost the religion. But now I think that's transitioning into a position where people are seeing technology and the advancement of technology as the ultimate goal of society, and that's very much being supported by the government. And to go back to your point about change and the massive gut-wrenching change that society has been through since the 60s all the way through to now, something that really struck me was how in China, you don't really find these terms millennials or Generation Z or Generation whatever to describe the different groups of people. How Chinese describe the different generations is they use these phrases Ling Ling Ho, Zhou Ling Ho, Zhou Wu Ho. This basically means you're born after the year 2000, or you're born after the year 1990, or and what this displays is that they actually measure these in 5-year gaps. So the people who are, in terms of the characteristics of people using internet products who are born after the year of 1990 will be different, substantially different from those born after the year 1995. That 5-year, there is a noticeable difference in user habits and in terms of their beliefs and their consumption habits. So that just gives you an example that in a 5-year period there can be a generation gap in China. That's really quite amazing when you think about it. But it's true. It's true. There are. So the young people in China are. It's when you compare younger and older generations in China, it's like they're living in sort of you've brought together people from almost different historical periods. And they're living together in one place and in one family, often perhaps in one apartment.
This last one, I can't believe we almost forgot this one. I just added it into the list as we were talking a couple of minutes ago, and that's the episode on Weibo that we did with Manya Kurtze, episode 36, and I think that was. I had a couple of people reach out and say that was their best episode. That was the one they enjoyed the most, because I think we covered a lot of cultural topics as well. It wasn't so technology heavy. It was more about Chinese society and culture and how Weibo had influenced culture, because that's what Manya talks about and writes about so much, and that's what she's best at, is dissecting this impact upon of Weibo and impact of online discussion and forums are having on society, and vice versa. The society, the things that are going on in society and how they're represented online.
Yeah, exactly. And so for me, so I think that this is probably our most unique episode, exactly because for the reasons that you just listed. And it's not so much a look at the technology, it's not so much a look at the business, it's more of a look at the actual culture, and the culture, the online culture specifically of Weibo, but then also using that as a lens to understand Chinese culture. And of course, not everyone is on Weibo. Not all discussions take place on Weibo, but it's an extension. It's a place where you can kind of dip your hand in the stream of the conversations as they're happening. And Manya is just perfect to have on for that. And for me, it also kind of brought me back to my old days when I first started really covering China for China Radio International, and talking about social issues and things like that. And when Weibo was the social network for everyone, and of course it's changed a lot. The landscape has changed a lot since then, but Weibo still holds a pretty important place, especially if you want to understand what's happening here.
Okay. Shall I just, because obviously the beginning is 2009, and just to paint a brief picture of the evolution of Weibo from 2009 to 2012, a lot of specialists on this topic always call it the golden days of China's social media, because from 2009 to 2012, so many exciting things were going on Weibo. It was also a time that was politically pretty tumultuous, and actually at the time you had more political topics being discussed on Weibo. You had a lot of memes coming up. You had Ai Weiwei, who was doing a lot of stuff, the Chinese dissident artist. So a lot of things happened in that time, and then things started changing. So in 2011, you had Weixin, WeChat coming up. It was also the time that the control over the internet started to gain traction, because let's not forget, in 2012 there were already 500 million registered users on Weibo. So the moment that the control was heightened was the moment that there was really a significant amount of registered users. That's when the impact of Weibo started to become bigger. So it's always, since the beginning that Weibo has been launched, it's always been this little, well, I don't want to call it a game because it would be unfair to call it a game, but a field of tension between control and letting go, control and letting go. Because if the management team of Weibo doesn't let it go, then there's no discussion. So they have to stimulate discussion while at the same time restricting it as well. And this is the dynamics that makes Weibo so interesting the whole time. Without discussion, there's no social media. Social media is based on discussion. So, and in 2013, you saw that with the announcement of the real name registration, that Weibo was losing its value a little bit. People were, starting to use WeChat. And in 2015, there was actually the point when the real name registration was really pushed through. And that was also the year that BBC wrote this article about Weibo being dead or Weibo being on its way out. And it's funny because at that time, I was really active with what's on Weibo. And I felt that it wasn't dead at all, because on the one hand, I was reading in the Western media, Weibo was dead. But on the other hand, I was seeing such interesting topics coming up every single day, and the discussions were pretty vibrant. So it was not dead, but it had changed. And I think a lot of the things that were being discussed on Weibo in those years from 2009 to roughly 2013 were now being discussed on WeChat. And Weibo was becoming more of this open platform of more public discussions. So that's what I always see, that Weibo has shifted since 2009. Its functions have changed, but it is still very, very vibrant. And it's interesting to anyone, any China watcher or anyone interested in China, I think will see something interesting in Weibo because of all the mixtures of accounts and the public debates going on there.
Well, I remember when WeChat was getting a lot more traction. I was talking this again. I was still at CRI, and a lot of my Chinese colleagues were saying that one of the reasons that they gave, at least their understanding of why so many Chinese people were so quote unquote abandoning Weibo in favor of WeChat, was because Weibo was too saturated. Like there was just like too much noise. People couldn't really find what they wanted to find, or get the information they wanted to get. Their needs were, in a sense, their needs weren't being met because it was just too busy. Whereas with WeChat, it was, a one-on-one or small groups and things like that. So, I mean, would you agree with that? That one of the reasons is because people kind of wanted a bit more of a private space to have discussions or to talk amongst each other?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of the some of the controversies that come up and become trending topics on Weibo, or especially the essays or the smaller stories that eventually become big trending topics, they all start on WeChat. But the problem for China social media watchers, of course, is that you cannot be in all of those private groups of friends. So that's why I'm happy that What's on Weibo has a very nice group of contributors who, or people who help me, who are from Shenzhen to Shanghai to Beijing, and who have a lot of different friend groups. And the moment that I receive in the morning, I will check my phone and I see like my group of friends is talking about this, and then I receive it 3 times, and then I know, okay, boom, this is going to be the trending topic of the day. And within hours, it will be on Weibo. So in those regards, I think that, of course, WeChat has taken over a role that Weibo once had, but eventually it will come to Weibo, and that's where it will be publicly discussed. So then it moves from those private groups of friends into the open sphere.
Sure. I think also official accounts had a big impact as well, right? When WeChat launched those in 2012, 2013, that a lot of media moved over, and they became incredibly popular and sort of replaced Weibo, or at least provided an alternative to Weibo for publishing.
Yeah, but I agree to some extent, but I don't fully agree, because I think one of the strengths of Weibo is that it's multi-layered. And what I mean by that is that its users are very versatile. So you're talking about government accounts. Let's not forget that thousands of accounts on Weibo are run by the government, be it official central government, local governments. Then you have the media accounts, the state media, some smaller independent media. Then you have the businesses, the NGOs. Then you have the KOLs, the key opinion leaders, the big influencers. And then you have the regular netizens. So let's say, if we simplify it, that there are 6 big layers of users that you can categorize. On Weibo, they're all together in this big open space, and they all communicate together. So this is, I think, I don't know of any other space in China, be it digital, online or offline, where these layers interact with each other, where netizens can, criticize the state media, where the state media gets into a conflict with a business, where NGOs will talk to local governments. And of course, official accounts on WeChat do provide information, but you don't see this communication between these layers coming up on WeChat as much as you see on Weibo. And a lot of the trending topics that come up on Weibo also are triggered by these interactions. So this is a big difference from what's trending, for example, on Facebook or on Twitter, and what's trending on Weibo. A lot of the trending topics on Weibo also started on Weibo. Do you know what I mean? So they don't come from outside. It's not big news that comes from outside. It's the news that comes from within the platform itself, because this and this state media said that and that to this local government official, blah, blah, blah. And then that is what becomes trending.
Organically, you mean?
Yes. So I think that, yeah, exactly. So that's very interesting that Weibo itself plays such a huge role in what becomes trending on Weibo. It doesn't come from outside, it comes from inside.
Our next episode that we're going to draw your attention to is episode 39. Episode 38. There we go. Which was with Edith Young, partner at 500 Startups, who covers or is responsible for China. And I remember we talked to her a lot about the differences between the sort of asymmetry of knowledge between the states and the states VC and investors and just general tech scene in California, and how that's very different from what we see in China. And she's very well placed to straddle that divide. And then she also went on to describe how she's dealing with blockchain at the moment, and this whole blockchain area is super hot, and how she struggles to understand the technology, fish out all of the fake ICOs and the sort of all of this frothy activity that and quite frankly some dodgy activity that's going on in this area. So that was really interesting for me to see, to hear about those all the stuff that's happening in blockchain in China.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that I've known Edith for a little while, but I didn't quite realize her stature in the community until we did this episode and saw the reaction to the actual episode as well. I think it's one of our best performing episodes. Not that other episodes haven't done well; they certainly have. It's just that Edith in particular did surprisingly well, and I think that Edith, she. One of the things I remember clearly is her talking about blockchain and how she looks at projects and how she evaluates projects, and I think that was probably one of the most insightful parts because, as a journalist, I'm not an engineer. I don't have the engineering skill set to really understand from a technical level, when a company is just full of BS. But Edith does, and she has the engineering background, and she has the investment background. She knows how to find teams. And so I think that for me, listening to her kind of talking a little bit about her process, what she does when she's looking at a blockchain project, I thought was super insightful. When we're looking at a lot of these projects, I mean, how much do the people developing them really understand kind of the technology or what they're doing?
Yeah. Well, so I actually find myself, and back to your original question earlier on, like, how do I spend my day, other than reading and understanding the technology, or the whole thesis of why. By the way, there's a lot of bullshit projects that don't really have nothing to do with blockchain, are trying to do token sale, and just anyway, there's a lot of scam alert going on these days. But I think that the key thing is to evaluate the team. So I found myself spending a lot of time looking at GitHub, really like checking out backgrounds for specific people, regardless is on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Telegram, on Reddit. There are a lot of discussion talking about various people and what they have done. And yeah, many of them have no idea what they're talking about. And to be crypto native, really, you need to be technical. And I found there are a lot of projects actually have nothing to do with blockchain, and they're trying to, because there's a bubble right now in terms of ICO. But I think the part that I think is exciting is the more infrastructure protocol level projects, because the whole essence of why ICO even exists to begin with is because they want to have these tokens to incentivize developers to continue to contribute code base and provide resources to make a protocol better. So that's how developers, if they can't, I used to be a mobile developer. If you put an app on iOS and Android, you don't make money from day one. In fact, you need to spend a lot of marketing dollar to be able to monetize. But with this concept is exciting because really I think is basically open source meet capitalism from day one. And developers are excited because they monetize via token with their work. So that's sort of the original intent for ICOs. And now all the other projects are trying to ICOs because it's such a big bubble. But I think the true projects, the only one will remain are the one that have pure developer and technology intent to make a better ecosystem. Anyway, I'm like working on a presentation particular for crypto investing, and I'm looking at all these projects. There's over 1,500 token being listed around the world right now, and many of them are bull. And so I'm basically trying to put together a whole scam alert checklist for everybody, so we don't go into. I'm spending way too much time like analyzing these projects, so that's what I do all day long.
Could you let us know what are some of your red flags?
Many warning signs. But to start, regardless of all the various different platforms I mentioned earlier to check out people's background, regardless on their white paper, on their website, on various different places, to start, the number one thing is to figure out what's the purpose for this particular token. And by the way, there's a lot of concept. Let's say a gaming token. You guys know better than most people that Kuaishou or YY, these sort of virtual goods concept, been around for 10 plus years. You don't need blockchain for that, right? Mm-hmm. So even though there are some tokenized ideas that may seem relevant, many of them actually doesn't really matter. They don't need blockchain for that. So therefore, their token design a lot of times have nothing to do with like why you use blockchain. So that's the number one thing like I think everybody should look at. And then the actual token allocation, which means that if they are raising, let's say, $20 million and 100% of these proceeds is basically that go back to the team, right? They don't really, the token allocation don't think about the developer community or sort of future economic design. Then they're here just to, trying to raise money just for themselves. And then I hate seeing all these celebrities endorsing various different token projects. That's a huge scam alert. And then sometimes I even found there are certain hackers will spoof. If there's a token project going on, they will actually get a different domain extension and then pretend to be a project, but really is not, and start taking money. So anyway, there are many like, small little things that, as you're looking at more of these projects, and you will find out, wow, there's really a lot of scam out there. But I found, the true, the good projects, great projects are usually, run by folks that, been in the blockchain space for a long time, that already have contributed open source. When you run these code on GitHub, it actually works. So there's definitely like a lot of things to do that, to help everybody to evaluate good projects.
And so we're back to games, right up my alley. We had Charlie Mosley on for episode 39 to talk about PUBG, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, as well as Steam in China. Steam, the games distribution platform. Charlie's based in Chengdu, and he's been involved in game development for quite some time. He does his own podcast on gaming and other things in Chengdu. But I think that PUBG is just this really interesting international cultural phenomenon that really has crossed borders and crossed languages, so that everyone around the world is playing this game. And so in some ways, China is a bit cut off culturally from the rest of the world. In some ways by choice, in some ways not by choice. But PUBG is one of those interesting examples where, this global phenomenon hit China, and it hit China hard. You even have, people complaining on PUBG about Chinese players at this point, because there just are so many of them. And also talking about Steam as well, because Steam has been operating in China for quite some time, but really kind of under the radar. I think they're still in this gray area about kind of the legality and some of the games that they do distribute and things like that. But I mean, for me living in China, it's been a great way to find and explore games.
Yeah, Charlie's always good. I really like the guy. And he's based in Chengdu, where I spend a lot of my time as well. So I've known Charlie for a couple of years now. And as working in the industry pretty deeply, real insider knowledge. So good to have him on the podcast. And I would recommend his podcast for those of you really into the gaming sector. It's actually quite good. But here we go.
Yeah, well, actually, that's an interesting topic. Steam in China is an interesting topic in itself, because Steam, as people know, is the largest PC game distribution platform on the planet. Nothing else even comes close. And until recently, Steam was kind of insignificant in China. And now Steam is huge in China just because of PUBG. So people inside China want to play PUBG, and the only way they can do that currently is through Steam. So over the last year or so, we've seen a massive increase in the number of users from China on Steam.
What are the implications of that, Charlie?
Oh, there's very many. There are quite a few implications for this. Yeah. So first of all, right. So China is the world's largest gaming market. There are more gamers inside China than anywhere else on the planet. The gamers inside China spend more money than anywhere else inside the planet, just by virtue of the volume of users, not because each user spends more necessarily. But having all these Chinese users on Steam creates a great opportunity for developers from all around the planet. So let's say you make an independent game and you localize it in Chinese. Well, now you have access to potentially hundreds of millions of Chinese users, which didn't even exist on the platform prior to a year ago. So that's an incredible opportunity for the entire games industry. It also presents a problem for China, because China wants to control all of the distribution, and moreover wants to have control over all the culture in China. So, television is tightly controlled, internet is tightly controlled, games, movies, music is tightly controlled. I'm sure you guys just heard that hip hop and tattoos were banned from television in China just a couple weeks ago. So these kind of events have become so commonplace that now we know that all elements of culture are carefully restricted inside China. And yet Steam is this overseas, they're based in Washington State, in Seattle. It's an overseas platform, which is now very popular in China. This presents a real serious problem for China, I think, because China is going to try to find a way to shut it down and replace it with a domestic alternative.
That's typically what happens. Have we seen any signs of that yet?
The most clear sign of that so far has been Tencent renaming its Tencent game platform into WeGame, and replacing Steam just outright with that. I mean, along with that announcement, they also announced that they had acquired the license to publish some really big Western games inside China. One of those is Rocket League, which you guys may have heard of. I think it was one of the largest independent games of 2016. So hugely popular game. It's a competitive sport game where you're playing soccer with remote control cars, essentially. But anyway, hugely popular game. They acquired the rights to publish that game inside China and give it exclusive access on WeGame. And so the threat is definitely that Tencent will promote WeGame, and they now have the right to PUBG as well. And that will just make Steam irrelevant in China. But blocking Steam is also not so easy, because you have such a large Steam user base on there who've already paid for the game and are playing it. And that would mean instantly cutting all those people off, which would be very unpopular.
Well, but also, I mean, Steam has been accepting WeChat Pay for some time now. And, if I go into my download settings, I can easily choose, a few different servers based here in the mainland. And so while they may have gained a lot of popularity and increased total number of mainland users, I mean, they've been active and available in the mainland for some time already.
Yeah, that's true. But it's interesting, because I think when Steam got the right to do that, which I think was in 2015 or 2016, it was, not really viewed as a threat in any way, really. I think that if Steam were to try to get that now, it might not be possible. I mean, at the very least, it would be much more difficult, because if we look at compare the game industry to the PC industry inside China, just for example. So if you want to publish a mobile game inside China, the amount of certification that you have to go through is incredible. It's unbelievable. You have to send a device with your app or game installed on it to certification boards who spend weeks or even months to review the game, and they review everything inside it. The game cannot include any English, cannot, nothing unharmonious. There's like a long list of things which the game cannot include. And if it violates any of these rules, they'll reject it and send the phone back to you, and you have to reapply it. It takes months. So for an independent developer, it's a really dangerous position. I mean, if you have salary and rent to pay and you're waiting for your app to be reviewed and it gets denied, I mean, it can crush a small company. So compare that amount of restriction to how it works now on Steam, where there is zero regulation. Everything on Steam is accessible inside China. So it seems clearly like there's going to be some regulation in this space. We're just not sure.
Yeah,
what
that
form
sounds like totally hard to believe that they've let it go like that. I mean,
right, they're completely contradictory situations just because of the two platforms. I mean, on mobile games, you can't show blood. You can't. I mean, they're completely censored. And on Steam, it's the opposite. I mean, PUBG itself is very violent. And actually, the central government made a comment on PUBG, which says, it violates socialist values. It doesn't suit the culture of China. And that was a big warning sign for a lot of people that PUBG was going to get banned in China. And at the time, this was a few months ago, there was a lot of discussion about would China outright ban PUBG, or would they censor it somehow? Would they change the blood to be green? Would they, add communist flags to make it harmonious? Like, how could they possibly rectify this situation? And somehow Tencent got the ability to license the game, made some almost imperceptible changes, and now the game is acceptable.
Yeah, and then episode 45, Tencent versus Alibaba with Lisa Lin from the Wall Street Journal. So this was the first episode we had a journalist on, a fellow media worker on. So that was quite interesting. I always like talking with journalists and other people who work in the media for more traditional or publications with a longer history than ours. Their experience of reporting and publishing is always a little bit different than ours here at TechNote. So it's always kind of fun to pick their brain. But then also I thought it was really interesting because this was one of maybe the only episode where there was a really interesting back and forth, in particular between Matt and Lisa. Matt's a pretty big, pretty bullish on Tencent, whereas Lisa's pretty bullish about Alibaba. And so there was a really interesting discussion about their strengths and weaknesses, and then the viability of the two's strategies.
Yeah, definitely a good back and forth on that one. And I think Lisa held her own, as you would expect. And so that was a really good discussion, and I learned a lot, and she learned a lot, I think. So, I guess it was a draw in the end, but you could.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, it's not so much about winning or losing. I mean, it's about educating the audience, and I think that we definitely did a good job. Certainly, I learned a lot on that episode, and I think that's a pretty good indicator.
They have very different management styles and very different strategies. Actually, so I did have a follow-up question for Matthew. How formidable a competitor do you think Tencent's mini programs will be to Alibaba, especially in the e-commerce side?
Okay, so e-commerce side, I think we also spoke about this in a little bit before. It's right, most e-commerce on a platform like WeChat is social e-commerce, and that's very different from search e-commerce. So in terms of social e-commerce, it's very powerful, but most of e-commerce is search driven, and so people still have the habit of going into Alibaba platforms to do that because they're the biggest and the oldest and the most stronger user habits. So that's really the challenge for Tencent, is to break into that. And the way to break into that would be to develop actually the habit of people using search more in WeChat, and then building up an ecosystem of e-commerce players within WeChat. So I think that is a pretty good strategy for them, and they are doing it. But it's changing user habits is not going to happen overnight. So I think they're on a clear course, but for them to will it happen overnight? No, definitely not. But I think over a couple of years' time, we could see if they consistently improve the tools they have and guide people's habits into using WeChat search more and being more comfortable buying on WeChat, then they can start to make a dent. But that's not a very it doesn't lend itself to like big headlines or like massive moves. I think what they're going for is a more sort of slower, more consistent strategy in changing user habits and getting people to be more comfortable with making payments and buying things on WeChat.
I must admit, I was quite attracted by the idea of Tencent and its 1 billion, user base, and how it could possibly overnight, maybe, or in a very fast time, steal like the e-commerce space from Alibaba. But over, I guess, the last 1 year or so, I felt Alibaba just going from strength to strength. And now I think it's Tencent that's really kind of scrambling to kind of catch up. That's kind of,
in the areas of e-commerce, I agree. Alibaba is definitely super strong, and I don't see that strength being going anywhere. Right? It's the question of how they can. It's all the other areas where they're competing that I think is the interesting part. So I don't see Tencent losing their core of gaming and social, and I don't see Ali losing their core of e-commerce. Those are like the bases. They're going nowhere. It's everywhere else where this game is being played.
Yeah, I guess the reason why retail is so sexy as well is because you see a very clear push by Tencent to get into the space, whereas I've not seen, beyond a few small efforts by Alibaba to get into the gaming space, any traction or any big push by Alibaba to get into the core areas that Tencent is in.
Exactly.
Because I think in social they have DingTalk, but DingTalk is really it's kind of made out to be more of an enterprise kind of communication chat messenger. And I haven't seen Alibaba making big pushes, whereas with Tencent, you see them investing left, right, center, and huge sums of money into trying to expand in the retail space. So it's a very clear strategy on that front.
We did see Alipay last year or the year before make some moves to try and move into social. I don't know if you remember that. There was a couple of things that they did. One of them backfired really badly when they got accused of facilitating prostitution at one stage. But there was a couple of things that they did to try and encourage social interaction through Alipay and get people using Alipay as a social tool. And yeah, they all failed. But because social is such a fortress, and I think ultimately when we talk about Alibaba and Tencent and why it's not that one's going to win, one's going to lose, but who could be stronger in the long run. I'm more bullish on Tencent because social is just an impregnable fortress in terms of getting once you have that network effect in place, as Tencent does. It's almost impossible to move in. Same for Facebook outside China. They basically have monopoly, despite what Mark Zuckerberg will tell you. They basically have a monopoly, and that's going nowhere until they get broken up. But if they get broken up, it's probably the only way for them to lose that. And it's but e-commerce is also, Alibaba has very, very strong network effects in that area, and a lot of advantages accrued over time. But it's not as strong as social. So we're able to see Tencent make moves, support partners, and build an e-commerce ecosystem that isn't as strong as what Alibaba is, for sure. But Alibaba's not able to do the same the other way, really, apart from, I think the most successful thing they've done is maybe support Weibo. So Weibo is definitely strong, but it's a different kind of social. Weibo is more of a news feed rather than people communicating. So when you boil it all down to it, that's the core advantage that Tencent has that is stronger than Alibaba, I think.
So I think I kind of have a contradictory opinion to what you just said. I actually am more bullish on Alibaba than I am on Tencent, simply because the problem with social media is it's very hard to monetize from social media. I can only imagine that if I were looking through my WeChat feed and I were a regular Chinese consumer, there are only X amount of ads I could take before I went really mad and kind of move from WeChat to a different platform. So I think in terms of WeChat, their monetization of the platform is definitely stalling, or the growth has slowed tremendously because there are only just so many ads you could push to a consumer. And they're kind of reaching the peak of of how many people they can get in China. So if they have 1 billion users right now, and China has 1.3 billion people, then your user growth is not going to be as phenomenal as it was before. And that means your monetization from this just slows. You're not going to be able to tap WeChat as a fast growth kind of driver as you did before. Whereas with Alibaba, I feel they are quite smart to be going after the retail space, because a lot of what Alibaba is doing in online and offline retail, a lot of what they're doing is selling services, trying to sell ads to merchants who sell on their online platform. And for the offline retail, when you use logistics from Alibaba, you use their payment services, they all make money from that. And retail in China is a huge untapped market. And we all know the Chinese consumer is just going to go from strength to strength. As incomes rise, China moves up the value chain, becomes a higher income country. So I actually am much more bullish on Alibaba than I am on Tencent. And I think Tencent knows that retail has to be an area they need to tap precisely for these reasons. And that's why they're going in so strongly on it. Because with Alibaba, they've only tried organic expansion into Tencent's core areas of social media and gaming, whereas with Tencent, they're definitely doing inorganic expansion into these areas beyond just trying to grow their own internal e-commerce app, if that makes sense.
Sure, that makes sense. I mean, what you said about the user numbers on WeChat stalling, definitely that's true. It's not going to go anywhere, but I think Tencent has known that for years. The user numbers in terms of user growth have been steadily declining for about 3 years now. So that's not anything that's a new development. It's just got to a point where it really is stalling down to 1 or 2% in that region. In terms of how Tencent monetizes ads, they still have a lot of room to grow. I mean, in terms of the newsfeed, you compare the number of advertisements on the newsfeed on WeChat to any other newsfeed in China, and it's just like night and day. On WeChat newsfeed, it's about 1 or 2. It's up to 2 adverts per day now. If you open up Toutiao or Weibo, it's I don't have numbers off the top of my head, but I would say it's in double figures per day. So there's a ton of room to grow there. And actually, they've been very conservative on advertisement growth on WeChat, but actually because of the way that they break down their financials, it's not actually very clear where they make the majority of their revenue on advertisement. And I actually believe that most analysts, investors are misled in believing that WeChat's more important than it is. I think a lot of their advertisement revenue is coming from other sources that aren't talked about that much. Things like Tencent Video, for example, where you get a lot of adverts on there. And they've got a whole myriad of apps and products in different areas, which many of which do have advertisement that people don't talk about. But I'm sure all of that money adds up and contributes perhaps even more than WeChat does. But due to the way they do their financials, it's very opaque. It's all kind of guesswork as to how that segment works for Tencent. With regard to retail, you make some good points. Retail has got a long way to go in China. You can be very bullish on that. I think Tencent's in some very interesting areas like entertainment. Online spending on online entertainment. Video is a good example. Things like esports, or traditional sporting rights, anything in the entertainment sector. Tencent's pretty strong, and spending on that's going to grow and grow as well in a similar way that retail will. So there's considerable upside still on a lot of what they've invested in and where they're strong.
Playing devil's advocate here, Alibaba has Youku, Tudou, right? So anything Tencent could get in terms of ads for digital entertainment, Alibaba could probably also kind of counter.
Similarly, I think Tencent Video is in a stronger position than Youku Tudou. It has more market share, it has more paid subscribers, right? Considerably more. I think number 2 is iQIYI, right? And then Youku Tudou would be number 3.
That's true.
But they're all investing in. They all go into each other's markets. I think every market we look at that opens up, they are investing. So they're supporting one of the players in there, and I think recently, was it last year, Pony Ma made the comment that he's really quite fatigued about it. That they have to continually invest. Why do we need to compete in all these markets? We're competing for the sake of competing sometimes. But it's the sort of one of the metaphors that Alibaba, Joe Tsai, used was that it's it's like a game of Go. So they're placing their pieces, not so much a game of chess, but more of a game of Go strategy where you're trying to encircle people. So if they're worried that, I think Ali would be worried that if Tencent gets too strong in one area, then they could use that to outflank them somewhere else. And the retail is actually a very good example of this, because if Ali gets too strong in retail, as we mentioned before, that could threaten the payments aspect, particularly for Tencent. So I think that's definitely a part of why Tencent's moving in.
All right, so the last one that we have for our review look back 1 year anniversary, episode 50, part 2, is a fairly recent one, episode 46, where Matt and I talk about Luckin Coffee. Yeah, I mean, so I think that we just kind of really did a good job with this one. I enjoyed it in particular because it really kind of brought together a lot of my interests, looking at the Chinese market, looking at what it takes to make a successful business, looking at looking at a specific, case study of how the market is different from the rest of the world, and trying to draw out some principles or some lessons from Luckin Coffee, they've been around for about a year or so, but they're just taking off, and they're taking off, and they want to take on Starbucks. They've not hidden that at all, and they have the potential to be a really strong player.
Yeah, very early days for Luckin, but I think we just wanted to get an episode out because I think we both felt, and we could see on the ground that this is going to be something, and I expect there to be a lot more talk about Luckin. And Borderline, again, it's one of those ones where we're really pushing the boundaries of I guess the term tech, but covering a lot of stuff to do with culture and business as well, which is nice. I mean, let's be honest, the term technology is kind of losing its meaning to some degrees because these areas of business and just general, where the boundaries lie with internet are sort of really getting very blurry.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's what's so interesting. I mean, it we'll play a clip of it in just a minute, but I mean, I think that it's this thing that happens where they're like Starbucks, for example, they're kind of they're in this transitionary period from brick and mortar to digital, or to an internet first business, or maybe they never will get to an internet first business, but the environment that they entered and that they started their business and that they entered China in is so different. Whereas Luckin Coffee, what they've been able to do is they've started off not in a transition era, but in smack dab in the middle of this mobile first, internet everywhere era, where the line between offline and online is almost non-existent, and they've taken that as their first principle. And I think that it's like building new buildings or something like that, where old buildings, yeah, sure, at the time they looked great, and they were like at the forefront of architectural fashion. They were built with some of the best technologies or some of the best design attitudes in mind. But 20 years later, you look at what's being built and it's different and it's better. And so I think that's kind of an interesting analogy for Luckin versus Starbucks.
I saw it in a train station a couple of weeks back when I was in Shanghai. they're spending a lot on promotion. And yeah, the other way that I'm seeing them crop up is online. They do a lot of coupons and promotions. When you download their app, you can get a free coffee. And if you share a link to download the app and your friend downloads the app, you both get a free coffee. So nothing too imaginative there, but it works. And people who are into coffee, they'll do it. I did it. It's a very effective technique. So for them, I'm guessing, I don't know what their actual base cost of a coffee would be. I'm getting probably something, if they're charging 30, maybe an actual coffee costs them more like 10. They're basically spending 10 yuan to acquire a new customer or acquire a new app download, which is, in this current market, not too bad, I think. Makes a lot of sense if they're high quality downloads, high quality leads for their business, which they would be if it's, because you're either kind of into coffee or you're not. I think a lot of people, if you offered them a free coffee, a lot of Chinese people, they just wouldn't accept it if they're not into coffee. They just wouldn't have any interest in drinking that. So straight away you're selecting for your market by promoting like that. I think I read somewhere that Luckin has said they're willing to give away 1 billion coffees in their promotion. So that's quite a substantial giveaway.
Sorry, I just want to butt in for a second there, but it's also kind of typical Chinese promotional BS. So the way that they do some of these promotions, the buy one get one free, that's simple. Like the first time that you order from the application, you'll get a free cup of coffee. Then they have these promotions where you can buy 2 get 1 free, or buy 5 get 1 free. And even I think if you buy 10, you get 10 free or something like that.
It's buy 5 get 5 free, buy 2 get 1 free.
Yeah, no, they also have something, you can go even higher than that, right? But the thing is, the way that they do it, and maybe it's just me, maybe this actually fits Chinese consumers, but I've had similar looks of confusion from my Chinese colleagues when they hear about this, when they experience it themselves. So the way that you actually take advantage of the buy 2 get 1 or whatever is you have to buy vouchers, and so there's 3 levels of coffee prices. So there's 21, there's the 21 kwai, there's 24, there's 27, depending on how big it is and kind of what it is. And so if you buy 2 vouchers worth 21 kwai, then you get 1 voucher for free. If you buy 5 vouchers worth 21 kwai, then you can get 5 vouchers for free. So I think that if you're going to be ordering a lot, or if you're the kind of person that likes coupons, which I think Chinese people definitely do, then maybe this works. But it's very different from a traditional kind of buy one get one, and at the same time it is confusing. And so this claim that they're going to give away 1 billion cups of coffee, well, it could be that what they mean really is that they're going to sell 1 billion, or they're going to give away 1 billion coffee vouchers. But then, of course, as with sunk costs, people don't always feel motivated to use what they have, and so 1 billion actually turns into pretty good profit of cups of coffee that they don't actually end up making.
Okay, fair point. The 1 billion is probably inflated considerably using techniques that aren't so clear at the beginning. It's not so easy as just giving away. A lot of it might be vouchers, and some of those might not be used. But yeah, so they've spent a lot on advertisement. That's how most people, I think, would first encounter the brand. But what's been so incredible is the rate at which they've been opening stores. So Luckin Coffee is a very new brand. They started in November of last year is when they registered their company. It's when they registered their official account. It's when they started going. They're from Beijing. They're from the Dongguancun area of Beijing, as far as I'm aware, which is the Silicon Valley of Beijing, of China, if you use such a cheesy phrase. And they certainly have a lot of stores in the Dongguancun area. And as of this month, we're recording in May now. As of last month, April, they had over 400 stores in China. So they've gone from 0 to 400 in that space of, what is that, half a year. That's quite an incredible pace of opening new stores, and they have targets to reach by this month to reach 500, and they're going for Series A funding pretty soon. Is what people are reporting. So at that rate of opening new stores, it's quite clear that they have very big ambitions with their business model and with what they feel is available and in the market, and where the opportunity lies to open a lot of stores. Because going back to Starbucks, they also have huge plans to continue opening many stores, hundreds of stores. I think it's something like 500 per year is their target on top of that 3,000. So there's a huge room to grow in this market, and Luckin's going to, they're scaling at a rate, even with opening offline stores that you would usually only associate, with sort of internet businesses, with traditionally things like sharing or Ele.me and Dianping with food delivery. How they suddenly invest massive amounts of capital into scaling up operations across China at a super fast rate. But Luckin is going for the same thing. Actually, their founders have a very strong background in O2O. They were involved in to get off the top of my head what was the company, but it was a ride-sharing app that they were involved in the operations of that. So the guys actually opening the company, founding it, they know how to do O2O. They know how to do this kind of business in China. And they're taking the lessons they've learned and the experience they've got in scaling operations fast and being internet first, but using it, connecting that with offline and applying it to coffee. So that's pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah, and I think this is part of a much broader trend. I was just talking with some people at Bianli Feng a couple of weeks ago. Matt, I'm not sure if you've seen them. They do they mostly do convenience stores. They used to do these unmanned snack shelves. I think they've scaled back on that quite a bit. And also in Beijing, they also have bike rentals as well, which is actually kind of interesting because the bikes that they have on the streets, they have huge baskets. And it kind of makes sense if their core business is kind of shopping, grocery, and convenience store, then they want to have huge baskets for their customers. But you look at their founders, and their founders are one of them is coming from 7-Eleven, and the other is coming from technology. And so what they're doing is they're taking these new technologies of being able to track supply, of being able to collect data from users, to understand the needs of the market digitally, the needs of the offline market, but digitally, and have all of that data. And they're using it to create a very aggressive new convenience store business. And this is exactly what Luckin is doing. And I think that it really is part of this broader trend. I mean, we can call it new retail, we can call it OMO or whatever. But I think that we are going to be seeing more of these types of businesses spring up because there's a lot of opportunity to increase customer satisfaction, to be able to offer new products and new services to a wide range of very interested consumers. And it's not going to be just coffee. It's going to be a wide range of different things. And I think that, again, this is what's always so interesting, is that China is the perfect place to be testing out these types of things. I mean, people are already so used to ordering delivery. They're already so used to paying for things on the mobile phone. You can basically just build on top of that a completely new business and aggressively scale it, as we're seeing with Bianli Feng and with Luckin. And that about does it for part 2 of our 1-year anniversary look back. Hope you enjoyed it. I think that, again, for Matt and I, navel gazing is a bit fun sometimes, and looking back at kind of what we've done and how we've evolved, and just the number of people that we've talked to, I think is it's a bit staggering.
Yeah, I think we've achieved what we wanted to achieve a year ago when we started this podcast. I think my expectations, I think we both talked about it, our expectations were just to use it as a vehicle to meet interesting people and have interesting discussions, and broaden our own knowledge and experience at the same time as bringing that to to the rest of the world through the format of the podcast. And I think actually also at the time we also felt that the coverage in this area and the knowledge in this area was lacking. I think over the course of that year, definitely there's also been a big change in coverage of Chinese of Chinese tech as well. I think we've seen a very big increase in the amount of content that's been written in English about this area, and so that's great to see.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that 2018 is really kind of the year of more people who speak English are paying attention to China, are paying attention to Chinese tech, and I feel lucky to be we're some of the first, and I think that because of that we have a bit of a different perspective than others. But again, I mean, like we couldn't do it without our audience, and so we're super grateful to all of you. And as always, if you have any feedback, please do let us know. Good feedback and bad feedback. It's actually the negative feedback that helps us improve. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you left a review on iTunes. If you're on Pocket Cast or Overcast, you can tap on that star button, and it will recommend this episode to your network. If you want to get in touch with either Matt or I, you can find our contact information in the show notes. And in case you didn't know already, TechNode has a plethora of newsletters for your daily consumption. We do a daily briefing, which is a less than 3-minute curated summary of some of the biggest tech news stories in China that we did not cover directly. We also do the China Funding, which is a thrice weekly newsletter looking at some of the top fundings of the week. And as we go forward, of course, we're going to expand that selection. So if you want to subscribe, just go over to technode.com/newsletters.